Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to syckpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the Sick Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. And along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba. Today, Alan speaks with an individual who has an incredible LinkedIn profile, spent most of his career on the customer-facing side of things. And I think you're going to be very intrigued by what Dennis Schultz has to share with Alan. And Alan, I understand you've been doing a lot of traveling lately, and you've got some traveling that's going to involve today's guest.
Yes, Russ, and I do love travel. That was one of the things I missed about my career in big tech. Got to go to lots of great places like Singapore, Shanghai, Dublin, Chicago, Austin, Germany, Dusseldorf, and other great places.
Wow.
So I enjoyed that, and it was great when it was on Google's dime or Facebook's dime or Salesforce's dime. Now it's on my dime, but I'm still traveling, and I've been really enjoying some of the events that I'm going to.
Meeting lots of people.
I was in Queens at the Sisters in Sales conference, and that was a great bunch of highly ambitious Black saleswomen. Then I was at the National Black MBA in Atlanta, Georgia. Got some good Southern fried chicken down there. Mm-hmm. And this week I'm headed to Portugal to speak to the tech community in Europe. And then with Dennis, I'm super excited. He invited me to come speak to the Blacks in Tech conference, or as they call it, Bitcon, in Disney World. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, very nice. So you'll be in Orlando.
Yes, and for those that are listening to this podcast that want to come say hi to me at Bitcon or any other event, I highly encourage that. I love meeting people. And anyone who does come up to me in a polite and respectful manner, I am more than happy to look at their LinkedIn profile and give them a few tips on how to make it even look better.
Well, sounds good. Dennis Schultz, he is the executive director for Blacks in Technology Foundation. And, let's get into the Sick Podcast with Dennis Schultz.
Welcome to another Sick Podcast, the Sick Career Podcast here, where I have the pleasure of a fantastic guest, Dennis Schultz. I met Dennis the way I meet lots of people nowadays on LinkedIn. I saw a great article that he was mentioned in, and then I saw that he was leading a fantastic organization, the Blacks in Technology Foundation. I reached out to Dennis, and Dennis was nice enough to reply to me. And we've started connecting and talking. We worked with him in the Blacks in Tech organization earlier this year with a scholarship with Kadima. And I've gotten to know Dennis over the course of time, and we've become friendly. And I'm actually going to see him IRL in real life in Orlando at the Blacks in Tech conference coming up. So thank you, Dennis, for joining us on the Sick Career Podcast. Thank you and welcome.
All right. Thanks for having me, Alan.
Dennis, I'd love to hear a little overview of yourself and your background. I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile, and it's quite an impressive portfolio, working at lots of great companies. But how would you introduce yourself who is Dennis Schultz?
Oh, wow. That is a loaded question, but I'll try to be succinct. I'll give you the abridged version. Let's see. If I had to answer that question in one sentence, I'd say I'm a professional problem solver, and I've been at a number of, I guess you would consider the major IT companies, Dell, Dropbox, Lenovo, Gardner, HPE, Rackspace Technology. Let me think. Samsung, currently at Microsoft. There's a lot of big brands in there. Companies I, frankly, did really well at. Some companies I bombed at. Some companies I was somewhere in the middle. So throughout my career, I've seen the full spectrum of success, I would say.
Awesome. And functionally, it looks like your role has been on the sales side, account executive, account manager. Is that true?
Primarily. So I would say the majority of my career has been spent in customer-facing roles, sales, account management, business development. Most recently, I pivoted to customer success, which is, I would say, a cousin to the sales role, because typically it's post-sales, management, service delivery, those types of.
Yeah. And on that note, for our listeners, so customer success, as you're describing there, is often on the post-sales, customer retention side, customer adoption side. How else would you differentiate between like the account executive role and the customer success side? Because you've actually played both those roles, and it looks like more recently the customer success side of the ball game.
Yeah, the sales side or the account management side is very similar to the customer success role. So from an account management or a farmer, if you use the term, farmer hunter scenarios, the farmer side of farming an account is very similar to managing the account expectations overall, making sure that what the customer expects from the product is actually what's delivered, and making sure that they utilize what they've actually purchased or what was actually sold to them. A lot of companies have habits of being sold service or good, but not necessarily implementing it properly or utilizing it to the full capacity. Then when it's time to renew a contract or sell them something else, they don't see the value in it because nobody explained to them how they were supposed to utilize it in the first place. So that's where customer success comes in, to make sure that those customers actually do see that value.
Awesome. And you alluded to earlier that you've been at a bunch of places. Some of them you were very successful at, some less so. What are some of the patterns that, and I've been there too. I can go off on my failures, not to say that you're a failure, but some of the less successful endeavors. What are some of the things that, looking back on the many esteemed companies that you have worked at, what do you think led to your success at some of them? And on the flip side, what factors led to the less successful outcomes for you?
Yeah, and I'm not shy about talking about it. This is one of the things I actually enjoy talking about, because I think it gives people a realistic expectation of what it is to be in the tech industry. But, and without naming specific companies, I'll say that the successful, or what I would consider the successful companies that I've worked with, were companies that shared similar characteristics and traits. The common denominators were things like good company culture, solid work-life balance, looking out for the employees from a compensation standpoint, companies that were happy to, share and increase bonuses. So things like that, and all the perks that go into working with a big tech company, those are some of the more successful, places that I've worked. And what really makes it, kind of a win or a lose for me in a lot of situations was the team that I worked with, both immediate and extended, and my direct report managers. They definitely had a big play in how I perceive myself within the company, the support I received, coaching to, be better, what does success look like? What does good look like for these companies? And that, I think, looking back on like the 25 plus years in the industry, those are the things that made the biggest difference to me.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you talk about the importance of manager. And I recently had on my podcast Russ Laraway, who wrote a book, When They Win, You Win, about the importance of strong people leadership and management. Thinking back about some of those managers that helped to enable and empower you, were there some things that they did in particular that was good? And are there some anti-patterns that occurred on the flip side that maybe you could have identified, that whether you identified during or after the fact, that could have been red flags? Sure.
And I mean, sometimes there's just personalities, right? I mean, you sometimes you meet someone and you get along right away. You know that you can be friends with this person outside of work, and, that's sometimes a good or bad thing when they're a manager. But typically it's a good thing when you have someone you can have an honest and open conversation with and feel like they're going to take it in the way it was, versus people who, drive a hard line and say, it's my way or the highway. This is how it's going to be, no room for flexibility. And I think most people recognize that there is a way that most people like to be managed. And that is, treat me like an adult, assume that I'm going to do the right thing for myself and the company. And, if there is a problem, make the assumption, at least give me the benefit of the doubt that this was an honest mistake versus something intentional and, adversarial. Those types of conversations, once you have them once or twice with the manager, it kind of spoils the relationship long term. So, I haven't had many, but in those situations where that has happened, where there has been confrontation with immediate management, I think, my perception of that person changed. And, then me wanting to go above and beyond, it's kind of hard to go above and beyond for someone who you don't feel has your best interest in mind long term. So.
Mm-hmm. And on the management front, and you've worked for lots of different places and lots of really great brands, great products, great organizations. Did what were some of the driving factors that led to you moving around? Was it poor management? Were good managers poaching you? How did the manager play in your decision-making process? Or what were some of the other drivers that led to some of your career transitions over your quarter century of a pretty impressive career?
You make it sound like it's so old, but I guess it has been a quarter century. That's scary.
Dude, you're the same age as me. So as old as you, I think you graduated in 96. I graduated in 95. So we're as old as one another.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes it a little bit better. Mystery does love company in this situation.
Although I do have more hair than you, which is rare. But
barely.
Yeah. Exactly.
But to answer your question, though, it's interesting. I think thinking back through the transitions that I've had, I mean, there are some companies, and actually most companies that I start with, I think I'm going to be here for the long haul. This is where I want to retire. That's kind of the thought going in. So it's not my intent to go in thinking that, this is going to be, a 2-year run and I'll end up somewhere else. But I think initially, early in my career, it was about ambition. I was, I would say a very confident, some would say cocky sales guy. And early in my career, I was pretty good and I let people know. And at the time, I was more mercenary mentality. It was, okay, I know I can go pretty much anywhere and make good money. Where do I want to go? And that was kind of what was driving me. I was coin operated and unabashed. I was, going to go get it. And, if you're not going to pay me, then I'll find the next person who will. Mm-hmm. As I matured, I realized that was probably not the best attitude to go in with, and some organizations really like their sales reps to have that attitude. So, and that worked well for a little bit until you get to a point where, it doesn't work, or, you have a couple bad quarters, which is what happened to me at a company. And they say, you know what, if you're as good as you say you are, you'll keep producing. And since you're not producing, then we'll find somebody who is. So yeah. I have been let go. I've left places, but all in all, I think for me, the biggest driver of change wasn't necessarily culture, but, really just the practicality of sales. I mean, if you are a good sales rep, you can find a job, is what I always thought. But sometimes even good sales rep have tough times finding jobs. And, I went through a couple of stretches where it was protracted layoffs and I had to figure out, okay, what am I really good at? Kind of have that gut check talk with yourself to say, okay, what am I good at? What do I really want to do? And how can I really, pay the bills and still maintain a semblance of life and happiness? So you kind of have those philosophical conversations with yourself. I don't know if you've had those situations, Alan, where you want to know, okay, what's next? And you got to have the conversation with yourself, then your wife. But yeah. I had.
Yep. Yep, definitely. I just had that recently as I got an offer from Amazon and contemplating going back to big tech versus and working Kadima part-time versus staying all in on Kadima. So definitely was a conversation that we shared between my wife and I, and we made, and it was ultimately my decision, but it was definitely a joint conversation and took a lot of her feedback into account. So you've worked at some amazing companies, some world-renowned companies, Microsoft, Rackspace, Dropbox, Symantec, Samsung, and so forth. Looking back on a lot of those, how do you get most of those jobs? And I don't know if there's a common pattern that you see there, but let me just go through a list of them, and I'd just love to hear, how do you get to Microsoft?
Microsoft was through who is now a friend, but prior was a colleague that I worked with through Blackson Technology, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that's a nonprofit that I'm currently executive director for, the Blackson Technology Foundation. And through one of our mentorship programs, this gentleman from Microsoft, Gary, he reached out to me and he was like, you know what? I would love for you to be on my team. And at the time, I was new to HPE. So I was at HPE for maybe, 6 months. And I was like, Gary, I wish I could, join you. I just got here. I'm happy where I'm at, thanks, but no thanks. And he was persistent. And we had the same conversation maybe 2 or 3 times. And at the third time, I was like, well, okay, so what would be the difference? What would I be doing? How much would I be making? And he told me, and I was like, So he got my attention really quick. And as much as I hated to leave HPE, he made it a very compelling story to come to Microsoft, what they were doing from, corporate responsibility, social advocacy perspective, as well as compensation and flexibility in role and, potential for advancement and just the overall dynamic of the company. I made a decision to move. So that was one of those situations where I didn't really plan to go, wasn't looking to leave, was kind of recruited over, if you will.
Right. And HPE, you were happy. You were there for 6 months when this guy, Gary, I think you said his name is, started wooing you at Microsoft.
Yeah.
What was your concern? Like, how did you wind up at HPE? You went from Rackspace to HPE. How do you wind up at Hewlett Packard Enterprise?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, while I was at Rackspace, I was doing customer success, service delivery management. And I was doing it for large government agencies, Executive Office of the President, U.S. Senate, those types of agencies. And it was very stressful. And it was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. I would get calls on the weekend, 2:00 in the morning. Hey, the White House website is down and we need somebody to make sure that it's back up, hop on this escalation call. Those types of things get old real quick and you get burned out real quick. And I got to a point where I was willing to take anything that came along after, dealing with that level of stress and strain. And it wasn't that it was a bad job per se, but there were resources and tools that, were lacking. They were in development and, the support overall, though I had a great core of people that I worked with immediately. As an organization, I felt like we as a division were not getting all the support that we needed from the organization. So I made the decision to look elsewhere. And HPE was a cloud-based organization. Were one of the places that I was looking. I wanted to do something that was, within my wheelhouse, that I was comfortable with, that I knew that was going to have, what I consider legs in the industry for a long time, and cloud's not going anywhere. So that's where I went.
Nice. And being there only a short period of time, were you concerned about leaving there? The communication you had with your manager, you were just starting there. Did you have? It
wasn't easy for me. Yeah, there was definitely hesitation because I like my manager and I like my team and they were so nice to me. And I felt like, they invested this this time and this energy to bring me up and train me and, welcome me on board. And, I'm leaving. Mm-hmm. However, I wouldn't stay just because, I didn't want to disappoint someone, because it wasn't the best thing for me. Yeah. I'd rather disappoint somebody I didn't know than disappoint my family.
Yep.
And that's really what it came down to.
And you're a free agent. You got to look out for your.
Yeah. And like I said, in my older age, I've mellowed. Like I said, I'm not quite the mercenary point operated sales rep, but at the same time, there is, hard decisions that need to be made.
Yep. And you talked about the Blackson Technology Foundation, where you're the executive director. Did you join that as executive director, or talk about how you got involved with the Blackson Technology Foundation?
Sure. So I'll start by telling everyone what it is, and then I'll tell you how I got involved. But the Blackson Technology Foundation is a 501c3 now. We advocate for the inclusion and advancement of people of African descent in tech. So basically, to increase Black people in the tech industry through training, resources like mentorship, anything that we can provide in terms of scholarship or support is what the organization does. And I found out about the organization at first as a member. I went to one of the conferences. So in 2018, I went to a conference in Minneapolis, and I was wowed by the number of Black techies in one place. Typically, I'm one of the only or very few in most tech conversations I had, either internally or externally. And it was refreshing, quite frankly. I was like, okay, this is cool. I'd love to see more Black folks in tech. So I asked the founder, Greg, I said, if there's an opportunity, I'd love to get involved in the New York City chapter where I was at the time. And he said, well, there isn't a chapter yet, but if you want to, lead something up, by all means. And I wasn't really looking to do that, but it was an opportunity for me to give back. And I was like, sure, why not? Let's try something different. So I volunteered to lead the chapter in New York, did that for a couple of years, built it up from, a handful of folks to about 1,500 before moving and handing it off. And when I left New Jersey and moved to Virginia, I decided I still want to be with the organization. They offered me an opportunity to be a board member. I said, great, that sounds cool. I appreciate it. Did that for about a year, and I've been executive director for the past 2 years.
Nice. So you took on this huge responsibility. It's a large organization, right? How many members are there in Blackson Technology?
Currently, we are at 20,000 in 16 countries.
Wow. And you alluded to before that when you went to Minneapolis that you were blown away by how many Black technologists there actually are. Talk a little bit about, go ahead. I was just going to say there were not only technologists, but they were like educators and entrepreneurs and students. And it's what we would call in the community a vibe. So yeah, it was definitely a vibe going on. I'd love to hear your perspective working at all these companies. I'm sure being a Black man at these organizations, these companies, you were tremendously in the minority. I'm looking at Microsoft actually is fairly diverse for a large tech company. They have 5.7% of their employee base is Black, which is still really putrid compared to the US average of 13.4%. But I'd love to hear your perspective going from these different companies being in the stark minority, probably in most of these situations. I have not gone through that myself. I'd love from your perspective, what challenges are obvious to maybe like a white dude like me, and what are some less obvious challenges some people that are listening out here may not be aware of?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that I had was, I would say, ignorant bliss. And I say that, in jest, but basically it was when I grew up, my dad was in the Navy, so we moved around a lot. I have been in very diverse neighborhoods. I've been, places where I was the only Black person for miles. In my kindergarten class, I was the only Black person in the school. So to me, it mattered not. When I was in college, I worked with a company called Southwestern. If anybody knows Southwestern, they go door to door, sell books, educational guides. And I did that for 4 summers out in Denver and suburbs of Seattle. And I can tell you in those situations, I typically was also the only. So to me, I didn't really have much of a problem acclimating. So culturally, it wasn't a big deal. I just saw myself, just like everybody else who's starting their career is, just hustling and working hard and trying to get to the next level. It wasn't until I was advancing in my career to the point where I saw less and less people who looked like me in the senior positions that I started to notice it. So when I would go into, either sales meetings or, internal leadership meetings at these companies, and I'm looking around, I'm the only person, or I'm looking at the org chart and there's no Black faces above me, then I started to wonder why. I don't know if it was necessarily a challenge, but it definitely had me looking at organizations more holistically than just the brand. I started thinking, okay, why is this the case and how and what can I do to change it? I didn't necessarily have any challenges that I can attribute to being Black other than the fact that it was kind of lonely culturally. Yeah. I have, a lot of friends, a lot of ethnicities, but it would have been nice to have a few more Black friends and colleagues.
Yeah. Are there anything or things that you do now at Microsoft or advise other people that are still dealing with being in the severe minority of Black employees in tech? Are there things that you've done, like you've got involved with Blacks in Technology Foundation, taking a leadership role there, but what have you done within the company, or have there been opportunities for you within the company to either network or employee resource groups, or are there things that have been particularly helpful to you to get some comfort being kind of like a stranger in a strange land sometimes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've been at Microsoft since the beginning of the year. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I did was establish myself in role first before really kind of branching out and doing what I consider extracurricular. So I wanted to make sure that, one, before I started, telling everybody, hey, I'm this, Black tech leader and you guys should, want to work with me and we should do all these great things together. I better be able to do my job. So that was first priority. Make sure, I got my training and, make sure that I'm comfortable, doing my role that I was hired for. With respect to ERGs, Blacks at Microsoft is the ERG for the Black community, and I am a member of Blacks at Microsoft. In addition, I have been communicating out to executive leadership, my role within Blacks in Technology and how we can potentially partner and engage. So between the different business units at Microsoft and Microsoft Philanthropies and the TEALS program and the LEAP program, which are apprenticeship programs and training programs, we are partnering with them to basically further the mission of Blacks in Technology. So I'm trying to find creative and smart ways to both enhance Microsoft's brand, because Microsoft does a lot, and I really respect what Satya is doing with respect to leadership and driving change, what Brad Smith is doing, who's the president, doing for diversity and inclusion efforts around upskilling and retraining as well globally. It's I feel like I'm where I should be and where I can potentially make huge change if approached properly. So I'm trying to figure it all out. Still a lot of time that I see myself at Microsoft. So it's a marathon and not a sprint, but I'm looking at ways that we can, bring those groups together, bring all the different, aspects of what I see as the big picture at Microsoft to leverage Blacks in technology some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And with Blacks in Technology, you said, I think you were introduced to that at a conference in Minneapolis. Is that the Bitcon, which is occurring, similar one in October of this year in Florida? Was that the conference, but it was in
Absolutely.
Minneapolis? So
yeah, the one and only.
Yeah. I'm excited to be going down there. I appreciate you inviting me down there to speak, but I would love to hear what that conference is all about, what you're trying to achieve with that, how people can learn more about Bitcon 2022.
Absolutely. This has been my favorite subject of late because it's going to be so much fun. So Bitcon is our annual conference. So it's the conference for the Blacks in Technology community. Our pillars this year are going to be learning or education, fun, because, you got to have fun, and career development. So we're going to have a career fair on site that is going to be sponsored by over 20 companies. We have companies like Google and Wells Fargo and a host of others. I won't give you the long list because I know this podcast is a limited time, but a bunch of big brands are going to be there supporting. We are going to have a metaverse demo area, which is going to be the largest on the East Coast for this year. We have over 20 companies that are going to be participating and showing their metaversey wares, whether it be XR, AR demos, software, hardware, you name it. That's going to be a lot of fun. We have guest speakers from all of the big tech companies, from Microsoft to Oracle to Amazon, you name it, they're going to be there. We have, partnerships with other Black tech organizations like the 110 Coalition. CEO Maurice Jones is going to be there. If you're not familiar with 110, they have a mission to upskill and train 1 million African Americans over the next 10 years. And we are partnered with them to provide technical training and support for that initiative. The CEO of NSBE, NSBE is the organization, National Society of Black Engineers. They're on just about every college campus, and there's chapters all over. They're going to be there. We have over 40 keynote and workshop speakers, as well as a few what I'll consider tech celebrities and a few surprises. In addition to that, I'm almost done, Alan. In addition to that, we have a pitch competition where we're going to be giving away $10,000 to the startup founder with the most innovative idea. And we also have a Madden football tournament for Xbox, where we're having an online qualifying round of a year-long tournament, which culminates in a $5,000 grand prize Super Bowl. So there's a lot going on. There's going to be giveaways. There's going to be networking opportunities, and everybody in earshot should come. It is a Black tech conference. If you're not Black, you can still come. But just know that it's going to be a Black tech conference. But we look forward to seeing you there, Alan.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being there. And hopefully you got some of those Xboxes donated and shared by your employer.
I'm working on that.
Madden tournament. Yeah. I don't see them on your sponsorship page yet, but I think you need the Microsoft logo on there soon.
I'm going to have a conversation about that thing on Tuesday of next week. So by the time this podcast airs, hopefully there'll be good news around that.
Nice. And I'm really excited to be going down there. I know you and I worked with earlier this year for a scholarship for Blacks in Technology, where we're able to sponsor a few really ambitious Blacks in Tech members to get trained and supported through their career advancement. And we had fantastic results with Wave 1. And not only do I highly recommend people to go to the Bitcon conference in Orlando just because of all the amazing stuff that Dennis said, but we'll also be offering more scholarships for Kadima, thanks to the partnership between BIT and Kadima. So thank you very much for that generosity, Dennis.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that as well. We live for success stories. It gives me the warm and fuzzies when we can, train someone and have them, advance their career. That's what we do it for.
Dennis, with your storied career, you've been in lots of great places, and you mentioned some successes that you've had and some less successes you've had. What's some advice that you would give people? What's some sick advice that you'd share with our listeners here of what's worked in your career, and maybe some advice of what not to do in one's career?
Sure. I think for me, being intentional about what decision I made at the time was probably the best advice. Everybody's going to have their opinion about what you should do or how you should do it. But I think for me, when I look back at all the career transitions and all the job changes I've made, people say, won't you be perceived as a job hopper? Like, well, I don't know. How do you define that? I didn't want to stay anywhere where I was uncomfortable or didn't feel like was the appropriate place for me just because of what somebody else might think potentially maybe. So for me, I would say the best advice I could give is know yourself and be confident in what you can and can't do and what you can and can't accomplish, because at the end of the day, nobody else is going to be paying your bills besides you. And you have to live with yourself on the decisions that you made. And if you stick somewhere and you're miserable because you don't feel like you want to be perceived one way or another, that's probably not the best determining factor of why you should be there. I would give that advice to anybody who's planning out their career. What I wouldn't do, so as far as, mistakes that I've made or things that I wish I could go back and do differently, is assume that I could do it alone. Because there were a lot of situations where I just felt like, you know what, as long as I'm performing, I don't need to do, the networking events or, the social gatherings, or when people get together and, want to hang out after work. And, I just didn't do a lot of that stuff. And I think if I did, I would have developed better relationships with higher ups. I would have sought out opportunities to get FaceTime with senior executives who could have become mentors. But because I was, more or less a renegade most of my career, I didn't really develop that muscle. So I would say early on, if you can do it, find opportunities to learn from others as either mentors or coaches, and, keep your eye open for those opportunities because they are there if you look for them.
Yeah. And no better place than Bitcon, where you found, I guess, a lot of mentors, which I believe one of them you said brought you over to Microsoft, right? Someone that you met through Bitcon?
Yeah, through one of our programs. Yep, yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So, and then you mentioned one other thing, and this will be the last question I ask you, the job hopping aspect. So you've been at a lot of different companies. I've been at a lot of companies as well. Has that impacted you in a negative way or a positive way, or does it net out in the end that you have all this diverse experience at companies? How does that play out when you were coming to Microsoft, when you were going to HPE before? How does that variety of experience either help or hinder you in your mind or by companies that are looking to hire you? And a lot of companies have hired you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's funny because every interview will ask some form of that question, and I'm always honest. I'll go through my resume and I'll tell them exactly why I left each job. If I got let go, I got let go. If I left for more money, I'll tell them I left more money. If I was recruited away because of a better opportunity, then, that's what I say. And at the end of the day, I think it does kind of net out. There's interviews that I've had where I didn't get hired because somebody said, well, we don't know if this guy's going to stick around very long and we want somebody that's going to be here for the long haul. And I can respect that. Maybe that's not where I want to be. But at the same time, if I am somewhere where I'm performing well, the company respects me, I feel valued, I'm not going to want to leave. And I'm going to want to perform. And the company hopefully will want me to stick around. So to me, it all kind of works out in the end.
Yeah. Awesome, Dennis. Well, so I guess looking back on that, would you say that your variety of experiences has been a net positive, net negative, or neutral in terms of your career?
No, definitely net positive.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. No, it's definitely been a net positive.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alan. I think there's a little bit of a lag. I didn't mean to cut you off there. But basically, the the career changes for me have been a net positive because I learn from every job opportunity in every organization. So all of the things that I learn in role, I can apply to the next role. And all of the things I learn about a company's culture, and like I said, I know what looks good. I know what success looks like. I know how successfully operating companies perform, what leadership at those companies dictate, and how they get the best out of their employees. I know what not to do when I get into a leadership position because I've seen some bad leaders as well. So yeah, I think definitely in that.
Awesome. I tend to agree with that too. So I'm glad I don't have to kick you off my show. So, but we are ending. We are running a little tight on time here. So you've dropped lots of great sick advice about the breadth of experience, about taking intentional control of your career. The last thing I'd like to ask is, how can people reach out to you? I guess one way is to come meet you in person in Orlando, October 26th through 28th at Bitcon. But if people can't get on a plane and head down there, how else can people get in touch with you, Dennis?
Sure. And Bitcoin is definitely the best way, by the way. Yeah. But if you can't do that, LinkedIn is probably the second best way. I will respond to all. I am the only Black Dennis Schultz on LinkedIn. Last time I checked. So it's Schultz, Schultz, Dennis with 2 N's. You can find me. And I'm more than happy to connect. And, if you email me, I will respond. It just may take a few days, but I will respond to everybody. I promise.
I can guarantee that that's the truth. That's how I met Dennis. I read an article about him. I reached out to him, and I think he replied to me quite quickly. So I do appreciate that. I do appreciate your openness to build and develop relationships. And I've really appreciated getting to know you over the last year plus, and really looking forward to seeing you in real life in October 20. Cool, Dennis.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Alan. And for anybody, I was just going to plug the website. The website, if you want to check us out, is blacksintechnology.net or bitcon.blacksintechnology.net if you want to hear about the conference.
Cool. So check out blacksintechnology.net, yes. Check out Bitcon, and hope to see you down in Orlando. Not just Dennis, but more of my listeners here.
All right. Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it.
What a great guy. A special thanks to Dennis for hanging out with Alan today. Got to give a special appreciation to our listeners for supporting the podcast by subscribing and following the show. Make sure you connect with Alan at sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK, and you can get started on steering your career with Kadima. Alan, tell us about the Accelerator newsletter that folks can sign up for on the website.
Yeah, Russ. So every Wednesday, hump day, as I like to call it, we send out the Accelerator, spelled XLR8R. And we send that out with great information about our podcast, about upcoming events that we have. And there's always fun pictures of either my pets, of Tootsie, Coco, or some of our birds, or listener pets. So send in your pictures of your pets to be featured in one of the upcoming accelerators.
There you go. Sign up for that newsletter. Once again, that's sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK. And for Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba. We hope you've enjoyed this episode with Dennis. You're going to love the next one.